Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Weekly Leaks. Some power hides its name. Some hides its sponsors. And other just dips out of the room before any sort of judgment or accountability arrives. Tonight, 3 stories. Not because they're identical, they're not. They're put together because they each answer the same question. What happens when power keeps all the benefits, but responsibility becomes difficult or impossible to locate? In one story, political money changes addresses before even reaching the election. In another, organized advocacy arrives wearing the face of an independent creator. And in the third, an office holder resigns just before the institution they belong to is scheduled to decide what punishment should follow. The Daily News will report these as separate events. Weekly Leaks places them where they belong, on the historical timeline of unaccountable power. This isn't a story about one party, one organization, or one disgraced official. It's a story about the other door. The door power uses when the front one is being watched. First, follow the money, but don't stop at the name printed on the check.
The Issue 1 analyzed special filings from January 2025 through June 2026 for the 4 super PACs aligned with congressional leadership. Together, those committees raised $714.6 million, and nearly $197.7 million of it came from affiliated nonprofit organizations that don't publicly disclose their donors. That's more than $1 in every 4, and the pattern crosses party lines. On the Republican Alliance side, One Nation transferred about $70.7 million to the Senate Leadership Fund. And the American Action Network sent about $44.2 million to the Congressional Leadership Fund. On the Democratic Alliance side, Majority Forward transferred $61 million to the Senate Majority PAC, while Household Majority Forward sent about $21.7 million to the House Majority PAC. Those figures come from Issue 1's analysis of Federal Election Commission filings. The transfers themselves are visible, but the original donors behind the nonprofit money aren't.
That distinction matters. This isn't evidence that every donor committed a crime, and it's not a legal finding that the recipient committees violated campaign finance laws. But it is evidence of an information structure where the public can see where the money emerged, though not necessarily where it began. The pillar is the vertical divide. The mechanism is the blindfold. The leverage remains real. The identity behind part of that leverage disappears.
The historical echo, as some might think, isn't Citizens United. It begins much earlier. During Theodore Roosevelt's 1904 re-election campaign, corporations supplied major political contributions. The 1905 Armstrong investigation, at the time, exposed secret political contributions by major New York insurance companies. In his 1905 annual message, Roosevelt called for corporate political contributions to be forbidden by law. Congress later enacted the Tillman Act.
The circumstances are different. The mechanisms are the same. In 1904, the scandal involved direct corporate treasury contributions and secret political influence. In 2026, the route runs through nonprofit organizations into super PACs operating within the modern legal architecture. The analogy isn't that the laws or even the actors are identical. The echo is that political leverage can be made visible while its source remains concealed. The movement is upward and inward. The committee gains concentrated spending power, the original funders retain privacy, and the voter receives the advertisement but loses part of the chain of custody. Money didn't disappear, only its authorship did. The first case shows how the source of political leverage can disappear behind a nonprofit name. But money's not the only thing that can change its appearance. In the next case, the message keeps its human face while the sponsorship behind it becomes contested. Political persuasion becomes more powerful when it doesn't look like political persuasion. And that is what brings us into the realm of the creator economy this week.
In August 2025, Wired reported on an influencer initiative called Chorus. According to the report, participating creators could receive up to $8,000 per month. Wired said contract terms include confidentiality of payments and restrictions governing participation and content. The article described more than 90 influencers as slated for the program, and it identified the 1630 Fund as its fiscal sponsor. The organizations dispute important parts of their account. Chorus called the reporting misleading. They said creators were free and encouraged to discuss their work. A 1630 Fund spokesperson said the fund provided administrative and operational services, that creators weren't paid to support or oppose candidates, and that participants could discuss their involvement. In May 2026, the House Oversight Committee subpoenaed 1630 Fund records as part of an investigation into the operation. The committee has made allegations about disclosure and document production, but it hasn't issued a final legal judgment establishing that Chorus or the fund violated the law. The 1630 Fund says it complies with the law and cooperated with the inquiry while protecting the rights and safety of the people who work with it.
That's the current record. A reported sponsorship structure, material factual disputes, and an investigation that remains unresolved. The pillar this week is our media watchdog Media Mundo. The mechanism is again the blindfold, but this time the hidden object isn't merely the donor. It's the boundary between independent conviction and organized persuasion.
In 1959 and 1960, Congress and federal agencies investigated payola. Record company money and other considerations were influencing radio airplay without adequate disclosure to listeners. The scandal wasn't simply that music companies promoted songs. Promotion's ordinary. The scandal was that purchased influence could pass through a trusted broadcaster and arrive sounding like independent editorial judgment. Congress strengthened federal disclosure law in 1960. The enduring principle is simple. Audiences should know who's trying to persuade them.
The circumstances are different. The mechanism is the same. The broadcast rules created for licensed radio and television doesn't automatically settle every legal question involving social media creators. Calling Chorus a legal payola would outrun the present evidence. But the design problem survives the change in technology. When money enters through one door and opinion exits through another, the audience needs to know whether it's hearing personal belief, sponsored participation, or some combination of the both. The movement is from institution to personality. The sponsor gains the intimacy and credibility of the creator's voice, while the audience may lose the context needed to accurately evaluate that voice. The creator occupies a dangerous middle ground where genuine belief and financial support can coexist, but it's that coexistence that makes disclosure and transparency matter even more. The familiar face just didn't make the institution disappear. It made it easier to overlook and responsibility easier to deflect. The final door isn't even financial, it's jurisdictional. The first two cases ask who stood behind the leverage. The last asks what happens when the institution finally reaches judgment, but the subject leaves its reach.
In March 2026, an adjudicatory subcommittee of the House Ethics Committee held a public hearing concerning Representative Sheila Cherfilus McCormick. The subcommittee concluded that 25 of 27 counts had been proven by clear and convincing evidence. The findings included campaign finance recording, commingling, and financial disclosure violations. The committee scheduled a sanctions hearing for April 21st. Minutes before that hearing, Cherfilus McCormick announced her resignation from Canvas. She's denied wrongdoing, called the proceedings a witch hunt, and contested the allegations. The House findings in the pending federal criminal case aren't interchangeable. A congressional ethics proceeding isn't a criminal conviction, the federal charges remain allegations, and that's proven in court, and resignation also didn't erase every possible form of accountability. Criminal proceedings and campaign finance enforcement can continue outside the House. But what resignation did change was the House's power to impose discipline on a sitting member.
The pillar here is the dupe state, the mechanism, the exception. not because resignation created innocence, and certainly not because former members are immune from every law. This exception is procedural, and the departure only changes which institution can still deliver that judgment.
And this isn't the new design, Grabo. The congressional research to this notes that departure from the House typically ends in ethics case because the committee lacks jurisdiction over former members. Its history identifies roughly 25 members who left after convictions, inquiries, or actual charges. In past expulsion proceedings involving Representatives Brandon Lederer and Mario Biaggi, resignation ended the pending House action. The House's own practice guides in resignation generally suspends or discontinues an expulsion proceeding. It also notes that the House has sometimes a God could censure after resignation.
The circumstances are different, the mechanism is the same. The facts and accusations differ from member to member. The recurring mechanism is narrower. An institution can spend months establishing a record, then lose part of its sanctioning authority when the subject ceases to belong to it anymore. The movement is out of the tribunal. The office is surrendered. The House loses the opportunity to complete a scheduled sanction, and the public receives an unfinished institutional sentence. Other courts can still speak, but this one lost its subject before it could even finish. 3 stories. Money changed address, advocacy changed face, and accountability lost jurisdiction. The blindfold hid the original source of leverage in the first 2 cases. The exception narrowed the reach of judgment in the third. None of that proves that every hidden donor is corrupt, every sponsored creator is insincere, or that every resignation is an admission of guilt. But that's not exactly the point. WikiLeaks isn't a machine for assigning permanent moral identities. It's a system for identifying the movement of power, who gained leverage, who lost visibility, which institution became weaker, and what remains unresolved. Across centuries, the recurring lesson hasn't been that history repeats itself with identical actors. It's that successful mechanisms survive by changing costumes. Corporate money becomes nonprofit money. Sponsored airplay becomes sponsored influence, and a departure from office becomes a departure from jurisdiction. But history isn't a prophecy of defeat. In 1905, exposure of corporate political money helped produce a law. The payola investigations produced stronger disclosure rules. Repeated jurisdictional exits can be answered only after the public notices the door and then decides whether it should be opened. Seeing the mechanism is the first form of resistance. Naming it prevents the latest event from pretending it doesn't have any ancestors. While the news reports what happened, WikiLeaks reveals the struggle it belonged to. This is the Purple People Eater. And since the present is at the newest edge of history, we're going to meet it there.